literally every strumming pattern you will want to play is going to fit inside one of four frameworks. The eighth note one, which is like the simplified one that we did last time, the 16th note one, which is this one, or there's two frameworks for 6A. Like everything we're going to want to do is going to naturally fall inside one of these. So if we know what it feels like to play each slice of these frameworks, we can play every single strumming pattern ever. You know, because they're all going to, like, you know, it's always consistent. If a beat falls on 1E, it's always an up strum, unless it's not. You know, sometimes there are a few exceptions, but when we understand why there are exceptions, then, like, you know, we understand why it breaks the rules, and you know, it all kind of makes sense. But unless there's a crazy random exception, it's always gonna be that way. And that means, because what we're doing with this is trying to integrate our understanding. So what that means is when we hear a strumming pattern and when we hear a rhythm, because we've integrated our understanding, the hearing of it means we also know what it feels like to play that, and we also understand what beat stuff is occurring on.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so then we don't ever have to kind of work stuff out.
And what does like intentional strumming, what does that give to your music versus just, like, you know, I'm thinking of like John Mayer's acoustic version of something like Olivia, you know what I mean? And to me, it just sounds completely random, but I'd assume him being such a good musician, it would be like...
What I mean by intentional strumming is we do whatever we want in the moment. It's not random. You know how we talked about thinking of each beat as its own individual thing rather than a strumming pattern. Like, maybe there's a pattern that's kind of the starting point, but from that starting point, now we can adjust each beat however the heck we like. You know? And so being intentional with it means that, you know, as we're strumming, we might decide to strum the mallet or the rhythm that the singer is singing to kind of emphasize that, you know? We might decide to kind of make it more like busy to lift the energy of it. You know, we might kind of simplify it a bit. Okay, here's another good analogy. How much time do you spend thinking about the act of walking when you're walking? Like zero, none. It's not something you do. You're like, I want to go over there. So like the default position would be to walk over there nicely. But if you felt like it, you could jump up onto the curb and go along there. Do you know what I mean? You could start skipping. You could run. You know, A to B is the objective. You know, you walking there normally is the kind of default strumming pattern that maybe exists. But from here to here, through the default action, you can vary that however the heck you want to create more energy, more tension, more release. Do you know what I mean? Like, but when you do that, you aren't thinking about, I am going to move my legs to jump up onto this ledge and now put one foot in front of the other here. You're like, oh, I want to do this, you know? Like, no thought is given to what you were doing from a physical or a technical point of view. And that's the same with the strumming. That's why we're taking the trouble to integrate it. Because if it's integrated, we don't have to think about what we're doing. Because we hear what we want to happen in our head and we just do it and we know how to strum it because everything's integrated.
I understand.
So that's why we're practicing this exercise, you know? Like, there are drills and stuff that we can practice to integrate the thing so that, like, if you just learn strumming patterns, you'll probably end up doing enough permutations of rhythm eventually that you can kind of vary stuff however you want anyway. Do you know what I mean? But it's not very effective. Like, you're far more effective to be like, here are the specific variations we can do. Here's a practice schedule that gets me through all of those. Now I can do all of them. Great, now I can do everything. You know? And so that's what we're trying to do in terms of, like, being as effective as we possibly can with our practice. You know, we're saying, here's the objective, here's all of the things that we want to do in that, here's what we have to be able to do this. Let's zone in on those, make sure they're learned as effectively as possible, and And then the balance, because that can be a dead boring exercise, right? So the balance is, how do we focus on doing it as effectively as possible while making sure we are also applying it and understanding what it is that we're doing throughout the process. Like that's the aspect of learning how to practice effectively. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
just kind of playing songs or playing repertoire and hoping that we end up with the skills that we need as a result of that. Like that's not effective practice. Can it be done? Yes. But like that's kind of more the thing that happens when you start learning as a young kid and you've got many years ahead of yourself and not really any kind of like pressure. Most pressure comes from people's, themselves, because they're like, oh, I want to get good. And when you start out and you're a kid, you're not like, oh, I want to get good. You're like, oh, this is fun. And then they start kind of learning songs and they kind of naturally just, like pick things up.
Fascination versus pressure, right?
Exactly. And when you're a kid, you don't need, like, that's fine. You don't necessarily need to be trying to do it as fast and effectively as possible. But when you're an adult and you're like, I want to learn this, like that kind of approach of doing things is not necessarily helpful,
No.
But doing just the boring stuff is also not necessarily fun. So then it becomes a balancing act of like, how do we structure things and apply them in the most effective way possible?
I love your passion, dude. Your passion gives me no, honestly, man, like your passion gives me passion, because like I'm fascinated by pedagogy as well. I'm fascinated by human learning. I'm fascinated by all of this, and like it's very heartening for me to know that actually the most limiting factor in this equation is, for once, not who I deem to be an external factor. It's me, because I went through a lot of teachers before you.
Really?
Yeah, big time, dude. And like I hadn't found, like, I'm not a good student. Teachers only as good as the students willing to like follow the teachings, right? But the thing is, as well, it was very much like I kind of just knew with a lot of these guys who I was learning from that I actually didn't really like what I was learning from them, and it didn't align with what I wanted to do. And I've stuck with you because I know that ultimately my progression lies behind the knowledge that you are feeding to me and the pathway that you're carving for me. And it's uncomfortable, but I will get there. Not a matter of if, but when. And it's not going to be linear. It's not going to be smooth, but we're getting there. Got all the notes on the E string. That's it. 3 months worth of training. E string's almost done, skis.
But you'll have it done by Christmas, man. Like I think I figured out today there's including this week, there's 4 lessons left this year before we stop for a 2-week break for Christmas. But like, you've got 3 more weeks, right? If you go 1 string a week, like that's 3 weeks, if you keep going over Christmas, like while you're away, like if you want to take a Christmas break, great. Like doesn't matter. We'll deal with the slight, like, lack of progress. You might regress a tiny bit. So what? Like have a break over Christmas if you want. But if you do want to just keep the 5 minutes of it going, like you'll absolutely have this down by the time we kind of resume at the start of January. Otherwise, 1 or 2 more weeks and then you'll have it down. Like it's no pressure, man. Low key.